Chapter 13. Some time elapsed before I learned of the history of my friends. There was one which could not fail to impress itself deeply in my mind, unfolding, as it did, a number of circumstances, each interesting and wonderful to one so utterly experienced as I was. The name of the old man was De Lacy. He was descended from a good family in France, where he had lived for many years and was respected by his superiors and beloved by his equals. His son was bred in the service of his country. Agatha had ranked with the ladies of highest distinction. A few months before my arrival, they lived in a large and luxurious city called Paris, surrounded by friends and possessed of every enjoyment which virtue, refinement of intellect, or taste, accompanied by my moderate fortune, could afford. The father of Safi had been the cause of their ruin. He was a Turkish merchant, and had inhabited Paris for many years, when, for some reason which I could not learn, had become obnoxious to the government. He was seized and cast into prison the very day that Safi arrived from Constantinople to join him. He was tried and condemned to death. The injustice of his sentence was very flagrant. All Paris was indignant, and it was judged that his religion and wealth, rather than the crime alleged against him, had been the cause of his condemnation. Felix had been present at the trial. His horror and indignation were uncontrollable. When he heard the decision of the court, he made, at that moment, a solemn vow to deliver him, and then looked around for the means. After many fruitless attempts to gain admittance to the prison, he found a strongly gated window within unguarded parts of the building, which he lighted the dungeon of the misfortunates. Mahamud, who, loaded with chains, waited in despair for execution of the barbarous sentence. Felix visited the grate at night and made known to the prisoner his intentions of his favor. The Turk, amazed and delighted, endeavored to kindle a zeal of his deliverance promised reward and wealth. Felix rejected his offers with contempt, yet when he saw the lovely Safi, who was allowed to visit her father, and who, by her gestures, expressed her lively gratitude, the youth could not help hoping to his own mind that the captive possessed a treasure which would fully reward his toil and hazard. The Turk quickly perceived the impression that his daughter had made on Felix, and endeavored to secure him more entirely in his interests by the promise of her hand in marriage, so soon as he should be conveyed to a place of safety. Felix was too delicate to accept this offer, yet he looked forward to the possibility of the event of the consummation of his happiness. During the ensuing days, while the preparations were going forward to the escape of the merchant, the zeal of Felix was warmed by several letters that he received from this lovely girl, whom I found means to express her thoughts in the language of her lover, by the aid of an old man, a servant of her father's, who understood French. She thanked him in the most ardent terms for his intended services towards her father, and at the same time deeply deplored her own fate. I have copies of these letters, for I found means, during my residence at the hovel, to procure instruments of writing, and the letters were often in the hands of Felix or Agatha. Before I depart, I'll give them to you. They will prove the truth of my tale. But at present, as the sun has already far declined, I shall only have time to repeat the substance of the tale. Safi related that her father was a Christian Arab, seized and made a slave by the Turks, recommended by her beauty, and had won the heart of the father of Safi, who married her. The young girl spoke in high and enthusiastic terms of her mother, who, born in freedom, spurned the bondage to which she was now reduced. She instructed her daughter in the tenets of her religion, taught her to aspire to higher powers of intellect and the independence of spirit, forbidden to the female followers of Mohammed. This lady died, but her lessons Turks were indelibly impressed in the mind of Safi, who sickened at the prospect of again turning to Asia, and being immured within the walls of a harem, allowing her to occupy herself with puerile amusements, ill suited for the temper of her soil. Now accustomed to the grand ideas and noble moments of virtue, the prospect of marrying a Christian and remaining in a country where women were allowed to take a rank in society was enchanting to her. The day for which the execution of Turk was fixed, but on the night previous to it, he had quitted the prison. The morning before was distant many leagues from Paris. Felix was procured passports in the name of his father, sister, and himself. He had previously communicated his plan to the former, who aided the seeds of quitting his house, under the pretense of journey, and concealed himself with his daughter in an obscure part of Paris. Felix conducted the fugitives through France to Lyons, and across Mount Cenis to Leghorn, where the merchant had decided to wait a favorable opportunity of passing some time with the Turkish dominations. Safi resolved to remain with her father until the moment of his departure, before which time the Turk renewed his promise that she should be united to his deliverer, and Felix remained with them in expectation of the event, and in the meantime he enjoyed the society of the Arabian, who exhibited towards him the simplest and tenderest affection. They conversed with one another through the means of an interpreter, and sometimes with the interpretation of looks, and Safi sang to him the divine airs of her native country. The Turk allowed this intimacy to take place and encouraged the hopes of the youthful lovers, while in his heart he formed far other plans. He loathed the idea that his daughter should be united to a Christian, but he feared the resentment of Felix if he should appear lukewarm, for he knew that he still had the power of his deliverer if he should choose to betray him to the Italian state which they had inhabited. He resolved 1,000 plans by which he should enable Islam to deceive until he had no longer a necessity, and secretly to take his daughter with him when he departed. His plans were greatly facilitated by the news which arrived from Paris. The government of France were greatly enraged at the escape of their victim, and pain spared no pains to detect and punish this delivery. The plot of Felix was quickly discovered, and Delancey and Agatha were thrown into prison. The news reached Felix and roused him from his dream of pleasure. His blind and aged father and his tranquil sister lay in some noisome dungeon, while he enjoyed the free air and the society of her whom he loved. The idea was torture to him. He quickly arranged with the Turk that if the latter should be a favorable opportunity for the escape before Felix could return to Italy, Safi would remain as a boarder in the convents of Leghorn, and then, quitting the lovely Arabian and fastened to Paris, delivered himself to the vengeance of law, hoping to see Delancey and Agatha before by his proceeding. He did not succeed. They remained confined for 5 months before the trial took place, the result of which deprived them of their fortune and condemned them to perpetual exile from their native country. They found a miserable asylum in the cottage of Germany, where I discovered them. Felix soon learned that the treacherous Turk, for whom he and his family endured such unheard of oppression, discovering that his delivery was thus reduced to poverty and impotence, became a traitor to good feeling and honor, and had quitted Italy with his daughter, insultingly sending Felix a pittance of money to aid him, and he said, some future plan of maintenance. Such were the events that preyed on the heart of Felix, and rendered him, when I first saw him, the most miserable of his family. He could have endured poverty, but when his distress had been the meed of his virtue, he would have gloried in it. Felt the ingratitude of the Turk, and lost of his beloved Safi. His misfortunes were more bitter than irreparable. The arrival of the Arabian now infused new life in his soul. But when the news news reached Lockhart that Felix was deprived of his wealth and rank. The merchant commanded his daughter to think no more of her lover, but to prepare to return with him to her native country. The generous nature of Safi was outraged by the command. She attempted to expostulate with her father, but he left her angrily, reiterating his tyrannical mandate. A few days later, the Turk entered his daughter's apartment and told her hastily that he had a reason to believe that his residence in Leghorn had been divulged, and that he should repeatedly be delivered by the French government. He had, consequently, hired a vessel to convey him to Constantinople, for which he should sail in a few hours. He intended to leave his daughter under the care of the confidential servants, to follow her at leisure with great care of part of his property which had not yet arrived at Lockhart. When alone, Safi resolved in her own mind the plan to conduct that it would become her to pursue with the emergency. Her residence in Turkey was abhorrent to her. Her religion and her feelings were alike adverse to it. The some papers of her father's, which fell into her hands, she heard of the exile of her lover and learned the name of the spot where he resided. She hesitated some time, but at length she formed her determination, taking with her some jewels that belonged to her, and some small sum of money. She quitted Italy with an attendant, a native of Leghorn, who understood the common language of Turkey, and departed for Germany. She arrived in safety in town, about 20 leagues from the cottage of DeLacy, when her attendants fell dangerously ill. Safi nursed her with most devoted affection, but the poor girl died, and the Arabian was left alone, unacquainted with the language of the country, and utterly ignorant of the customs of the world. She felt, however, in good hands. The Italian had mentioned the name of a spot where they would be bound, and after her death, the woman of the house in which they had lived took care that Safi should arrive safely in the cottage of her lover.